There's an article that I read, Tiaan, that was written in March by Karen Allen of ISS, and you are quoted in that article. There had been this, cyber attack on a water treatment plant in Florida in the United States, and you guys were talking about the risk of single supplier entities. And my goodness, when I then saw what was happening with Transnet, I was just struck by the eerie similarities to what you guys were talking about at the time that has come to fruition. Was this a risk that was waiting to materialize? And more importantly, do we face more potential for similar risks in terms of cyber attacks disrupting the big single suppliers in South Africa?
Hi, Thulasizwe. Thank you, and hi to all the listeners. Or the viewers, actually. Thank you. So that article was preemptive, but it's also based on a number of things we're seeing happening in cyberspace globally. And it's only a matter of time for more what we call critical infrastructure suppliers to potentially suffer these risks. A lot of them have spent much time preparing and preparing for these types of attacks and how to respond and even to prevent them from happening, and we want to commend the Transnet team for successfully getting their systems back online so quickly. I think that was quite a feat. But we're seeing more of that, and when we talk about critical infrastructure, we actually don't just mean logistics. It's transport, it's water supply, it's fuel supply, telecommunications, even financial services infrastructure. And all of those industries have ways of working with this and guarding against it. We have been seeing a lot of what's called ransomware attacks, but that's across the board, right? So this isn't, we don't have anything that we specifically can comment around the Transnet situation, so please don't interpret it in that way. So ransomware attacks, very pervasive. Good news is there seems to be a decline in that at the moment, but organizations mustn't take that as a sign that they can now take the foot off the accelerator of their security programs. That's definitely not what they must do. They must continue. They must continue because other reports this morning as well, some of these previous ransomware attackers have now proceeded to split themselves up. They formed new groups and now they're starting attacks again. So that attack vector not going away, organizations must continue to prepare.
So, I mean, people will be wondering, Tiaan, how it was possible that a cyber attack could bring, what many of us only encounter as an outward physical movement of shipping containers and loading and offloading, how that could be affected by a cyber attack. It's all got to do with the increasing adoption of technologies, including what you guys call in your industry the Internet of Things. Just help us understand that aspect, why it is that what we know to be physical value chain and manufacturing processes can be affected by a cyber attack.
So a very good question, right? So as the world is evolving with globalization, 24/7 operations, and this automation that's been brought into business to make the business processes more efficient, to deal with much larger volumes of data at a much higher rate. All of these technologies come together to give businesses some real benefits. But every time you add a new technology, if you add more entry points, data collection points, it adds more points where you can be attacked and be vulnerable to the environment. So for organizations what they're doing is they're connecting what we call the operational technology. So it's non-traditional IT technologies are now being connected to what's normally in IT departments and enterprise IT. All of these things are coming together to give them that data and that insight in order to run their businesses much better and much faster than they used to be able to do before, and to help them optimize how the business operates. Unfortunately, with all of those things, you have more points that you have to protect, and the vulnerability increases. And what we've seen in the last 6 months is an incredible increase in the number of components that have vulnerabilities that have been disclosed on the internet much faster than the vendors or the suppliers of that technology can actually patch them or release patches. And once the patches are released, much faster than companies can necessarily roll out the patches. So organizations need to look at that, so we need to get patches in faster, We need to make sure that the designs of our systems have layers of defense so that if the first layer fails, we can still operate. What's also very important is the crisis management plans of organizations. So those have been very severely tested in South Africa in the last 12 to 18 months and also recently this month. And their business continuity plans. How do they continue operating, even if their systems are down? What we cannot say is there will ever be a system that will be 100% attack-proof. That's not possible, except if you disconnect everything and it does nothing. Then there's no value to derive from it either. So it's all about making sure that you do the right things, and we like to say that organizations must absolutely get the basics in place, and we call that cyber hygiene. So the patching must be done, so systems must be up to date. They need to train their staff to be aware of phishing emails and suspicious activity, that they report that and then be able to respond. They must have antivirus installed, must absolutely make use of backups that are in a form and in a location where they can't be affected by any cyber attack.
Right.
So we usually call that, big word, immutable storage, but that's really an offline backup. And organizations that have done that, right, clearly, they get an attack, they detect the attack, they suspend operations temporarily for a period of time while they then eradicate the attack from the environment, they install their backups, they recover the systems, and on they go. Some organizations will operate much more closely to real time in terms of responsiveness, so they won't even use backups. So they have what's called high availability, but you still need backups. In case your high availability systems are affected.
Tiaan, let me just, before I ask you the next question, just apologize to you. I might interrupt you mid-sentence because I'm watching with with one eye the president out in Midrand, and as soon as I get an indication that he's about to make comments to the media, I will have to, unfortunately, disrupt you mid-sentence. But nevertheless, let me ask you about something that your colleague Eric McGee is quoted as saying, where we have more vulnerability is in electricity. That worries me, the potential for chaos that could trigger. Am I being alarmist, or is it important for us to flag this? With the experience of Transnet, flag it now before anything happens so that, if anyone is sleeping on the job and, they don't have their finger on the pulse, this is the moment that they sit up and pay notice and take notice of this real threat around our electricity supply.
So electricity supply security, a big problem in South Africa, potentially. We have load shedding, so most of the country in business and even individuals in their private lives have adjusted to that. We have found ways of continuing to operate while we have load shedding happening, right? So as an impact on the country for short periods of time, I think that is covered, right? So from that perspective, we shouldn't be alarmist. It's if there is a cyber or physical attack that disrupts our power systems to the extent that we need to have cold restart or black restart, we can potentially be in a much bigger problem situation, because that will result in potentially much longer outages. I don't want to comment on that any further, because that's just generally a risk with power systems, whether you're in South Africa or anywhere else in the world. That type of attack, we have seen attacks on power utilities globally. Some of them have just been this malicious vandalism. Some of them have been a bit more determined and a bit more specific in terms of causing damage to the infrastructure. None of them have been for weeks on end that the power has gone down. It's been a disruption that was dealt with fairly quickly. And we believe that Eskom is in a position to deal with that type of situation, because we've had to deal with that for so many years now.
Yeah, Tiaan, thank you. Unfortunately, I'm completely out of time, and we didn't even get to talk about the issue of ransomware. But thank you for your insights there, because you really are at the coalface of some of these issues.